You're listening to the Jam Price Show, all about movies, and today my guest is Oscar-winning makeup artist Lois Burwell. Welcome to the show, Lois.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a
Pleased to be
pleasure.
here.
It's lovely having you here. We got a chance to meet at the Turner Classic Movie Film Festival, and you were one of the featured guests, and you had a lovely conversation with the beautiful Alicia Malone. And I knew then, after I attended that conversation, I knew I definitely wanted to have you on my show. So I'm so glad that you made time in your busy schedule to be on the show today.
Oh, my pleasure.
So one of the things I wanted to ask you is when you look at someone and you meet them, do you ever think about making them over?
Well, I suppose really honestly, the truth is no, not for 99.9% of the time. I will tend to look at someone and say, God, I'd love to put a beard on you, or what a wonderful period face, or I love that character, or that's a really beautiful makeup, or what a beautiful person. But no, I don't really do that because I feel that unless someone asks for help, I wouldn't necessarily put myself in the way of going, I think if you did this, it would be better because, it's the expression of who they are and their perception of themselves. And in my experience, people have what I call the mirror face, in that when they're in front of a mirror, they will arrange their features when they're looking at themselves in a way that probably the rest of us don't see them.
Interesting. How did you get into this industry? What was the impetus for you to become a makeup artist?
Well, I think when I was a child, I loved doing makeup and I liked painting faces and used to be sort of at the forefront of making up my fellow students at the local dance school when we do a performance. So I think it was probably always there with me. But primarily what I actually wanted to do was work in film. I wanted to tell those stories in a cinema. And the two things, I didn't actually formulate growing up that there could be a career being a makeup artist because none of my family were in the film industry. And it seemed, growing up in North London in a very regular family, that it was sort of something that everyone else did and it wasn't necessarily a part of my reality. So when those things came together, then it seemed a natural course. And more than that, that's what I was asked to do. People would ask me to do that. So therefore, that's what I did. And then the more you do, that's what you're known for. And,
And then
here I've ended up.
And what?
And here I've ended up being a makeup artist,
Yeah,
which is wonderful. And it's a career that I'm very grateful for, actually. I've been really lucky.
You've worked with some amazing directors on some amazing projects too, which I want to get into a little bit more with you. What makes you decide whether or not you're going to choose a project or not? How do they come? First of all, how do they come to you? And second, do you turn things down, and why would you turn it down? Things. What makes you decide to go forward? Those are three questions.
So, well, it depends on what period of my life. I mean, in the beginning, you tend to say yes to everything because you want to work and you're building up your career and your resume, and that's important. But even then, there were a couple of things that I thought were either, shady or something that didn't sit right. I mean, whatever it was, it didn't sit right. And I actually think that that's a good litmus test. It shouldn't be based on fear of stretching yourself because that's something else entirely. Like, oh, I want to stay in the safe lane. But when it becomes something that you can't be the ugly sister trying to put your foot in Cinderella's shoe. It will never work. And if you don't belong on that project and you feel you don't belong on that project, it's better not to do it because it's never going to work out. But on the other hand, sometimes you have to work because you have to pay the gas bill. So there are a lot of component parts.
Right. Right. But after your long career, I'm sure you have a little bit more autonomy to choose projects that you really want to work on.
Yes, and that's really a privilege, and that's rare, and I know how rare it is, and I really appreciate that. But yeah, so I mean, normally projects, it's either someone who knows you or someone who knows someone who knows you. And then either they go through your agent once you have an agent, or they reach out to you directly. I mean, it's that's how it tends to work and how projects come up. But I never assume, even when I've been invited to work with someone more than once, I think it's a fatal flaw to take anything for granted.
Anything that we assume, take for granted, never a good place to be. I have found in my lifetime too, for sure. Let's talk. Well, gosh, you have so many people that you've worked with. With Steven Spielberg, how many times have you worked with him now?
Do you know, I can't actually recall, to be perfectly honest. It must be 8 or 9 times. And we have discussed, or I've been in prep on a film that hasn't happened as well. For example, Memoirs of a Geisha. That obviously the film was made, but Stephen wasn't directing it. So yes, and that actually is one that's the crown jewel. I feel working with Stephen has been, an enormous privilege.
And you were nominated for Saving Private Ryan for that film. Was that your first collaboration with Stephen, Saving Private Ryan, or had you worked with him before?
Well, I have worked with him before, actually, but in a very, lowly position of being a different position, I should say, not necessarily lowly, because everyone contributes equally, I feel, on a film. But I was first worked with on a film set with him on Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom in 1983.
Wow.
Terrifying. But so yes, that was the first time as heading the department, and yeah, it was a really hard film to work on. Physically challenging as well as challenging work-wise, because the nature of the first 20 minutes for the D-Day landings were that a lot of it wasn't necessarily storyboarded, but ideas were coming up and situations coming up around the storyboarding. So you had to think on your feet and come up with things and run in and out of the sea in your dry suit, putting blood on various people, and dealing with the special effects, squibs, covering those, creating blank faces, all those things. Yeah, it was a lot of work and a huge challenge, but I have to say it was. The wonderful thing about working with Stephen is that you end up being a better makeup artist at the end of it than you were day one, because there's always a challenge. You can go with an idea, and it's rather like, that child's game of you put one hand on top of another and you go up and up and up. Well, that's what he does with ideas. So you go with an idea and you think, oh, this is a winner. And you know how you're going to do it. And he goes, yeah, that's really good. But what about if we do this? Can you do? You have to go, right, leave it with me, wander off, and then go, how am I going to do that? And so he pushes himself, he pushes everyone, and you end up being better at your job at the end of it than on day one, which is great.
That's very rewarding. It's the way it probably should be, right? He's very collaborative, it sounds like, but yet allows you to go do what you need to do also.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely 100%. And yeah, it's just joyous actually. And it's wonderful to work with someone that you share certain images with. I mean, that's great that you have something to bring to the party. It's not dismissed. And the wonderful thing is it's not by committee. There's nothing that's decided by a group of people, which is always the nightmare when you go on to some films and everyone has an opinion and they all seem to think that their opinion counts as much as each other. You know, you need a captain of the ship, and with Stephen, you've got the captain of the ship, so it's great.
I think Steven Spielberg has said through the years that Saving Private Ryan was one of his most difficult shoots. And when Christopher Nolan was going to do Dunkirk, I think uh, Christopher went to Steven Spielberg to talk to him about it. And I think he told him, don't.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, I mean, it really was tough and challenging, and without the shadow of a doubt. But everyone, the wonderful thing was that everyone was working as hard as each other, and that's the joy of filmmaking. When you have the support, or you can support, it's a quid pro quo, other departments. So you're all in it together and united around telling that particular story. That collaboration, that feeling is wonderful. And when Stephen is on a set, you know, and the shot goes well and it's tricky and it's difficult and there's all these component parts, he gets so excited and just says yes. But it's as if it's his first film. It's absolutely fresh and new. There's nothing jaded or, oh well, I've seen all this before. That doesn't happen. And I think that's a wonderful thing to be around, that energy, and to have that energy yourself.
I agree. I agree. That's what keeps us young. That's why it's like, Clint Eastwood, 94 years old, just directed another film. That's what keeps you going, keeps you young, and so I'm looking forward to seeing his new film. But 94 years old, still doing it. And I think that's what's really important, to have something you're passionate about throughout your life. I think that's the essence. Like, when you find something that makes you passionate and excited about getting up out of bed every morning.
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be filmmaking. It can
No,
be something else. It can be gardening, it can be your dog, it can be anything. But yes, I mean, you need something that spark of life. I mean, the body work might wear out, but that 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 internal life needs the
there.
spark.
But we have to talk about Braveheart. Since you won an Oscar for Braveheart, and working with Mel Gibson, you've worked with him a number of times also, and you met your husband on the set. So I'd like to know, when you got the call to do Braveheart, that was a very tough job, makeup wise. I'm sure. Did you have ideas immediately of how you envisioned this when you started filming it?
Well, yes and no. So um, Mel spoke to me about it before the film was greenlit, actually, because we were working together on Hamlet, it must have been. Or we were in contact afterwards, probably doing press actually for Hamlet. I think it was around that time. Anyway, so um, and he made a very good Hamlet, I thought. Anyway, so he was talking about this massive challenge, and I didn't presume to be a part of it, although he asked me to be a part of it, and obviously that's what happened. But when we met to talk about, I was sent the script, and we were talking about the essence of the story and what he might like. And what he really wanted was some form of war paint for the Battle of Stirling. And I wandered off and thought about that and came up with the idea of it being blue, because that would link with the Scots, purely because when the Picts, Hibernians, and Caledonians were moved north of the border into Scotland by the Romans invading Britain, the ancient Britons would use woad, which is a form of flax, to dye their skin. And there's one Roman general's report, I think it was a general, I can't remember now, forgive me for that, but that says that when they were looking across the Menai Straits, which is the part between Wales and England, that there were these women with these blue faces that were so frightening that he'd dread to see what their men were like if the women were so frightening. So that kind of idea of turning something that was actual into something that is not historically correct, but works within the concept of storytelling for the Scots. I put that forward, and basically the recipe for it was something that had come up on a film previously called The Draftsman's Contract, and then it got tweaked, but that's what we did. But instead of having a liquidizer to make up the makeup, we actually had to get a cement mixer because there was so much of it. I mean, a very clean, sterile, I have to say, cement mixer, but even so, that's what we did. Yes, so
It's
there were
why
some ideas that I brought to the party, and that's often the way. You know, you either have the vast bulk of the ideas in the makeup department, or it's shared out.
makeup's a cement mixer. That's a very unusual. That's a little like nice little secret behind the scenes secret.
Well, the thing is that people think of make when they think of makeup, they kind of shop, which of course we do, but at the same time in film, there's a whole other world that really is the tip of the iceberg. The rest of it are labs and, you know, stinky foam and baking things in ovens, mixing things up. And, you know, I remember when I first started, I had the privilege of meeting and working alongside in the crowd room, in fact, a makeup artist called Roy Ashton. And Roy Ashton was basically the makeup artist for all the Hammer horror films. And he was bordering on retirement when I first started, but he had a killer blood recipe that you could, you know, just mix up on your cooker at home. And because then you couldn't just walk into a professional makeup shop and buy, you know, a tub of pus, for example. So you'd go to the chemist and get in the UK and get a cream that's called TCP, which is basically for cuts and abrasions, but has that yellow green tinge to it, which is perfect, so that you would use that. So makeup can be a variety of surprising things. It's much more, it's very close to the culinary arts in formulas and science.
Interesting, very interesting. But take me to Oscar night, the night you won the Oscar, and so did your husband. So let's talk a little bit about that evening for you.
Well, he wasn't my husband then. He was my boyfriend. And I was actually working at Pinewood Studios in the UK on a film called The Fifth Element. So I wasn't around for the build-up to the Academy Awards. But of course it was thrilling, but my mind and everything else was basically concentrated on the film I was working on. And at one point I didn't know if I'd be able to attend the ceremony, but then, you know, everyone was understanding. So, you know, basically I was putting on eyelashes on the flight attendants for Floston as the car was pulling up outside. And in fact, one of them said, "Oh, aren't you coming on the set with me?" And I went, "No, I'm terribly sorry, I'm going to LA." She thought I was mad. Anyway, so just so kind of flew into it all. And it's a very heady mix to suddenly be, you know, thrown into, and was very grateful that, you know, obviously John was there, but also Mel, because then you can just be yourself. And then in the theatre then, and still now to a certain degree, you either sit, it depends on the year and what's been chosen, but you either sit by category, i.e. all the makeup people together, all the cinematographers together, or you sit by film. Well, that year it was by category. So John was on the far side of the theatre, miles away from me, and I was with the other makeup nominees. But they popped me at the end of the aisle, which is meant to be some kind of nod to the expectation of winning, which, having done work, voluntary work, I have to say, at the Academy on the Board of Governors and as chairing the awards committee, I have to say it isn't that way at all, and it's much more random than that. There's no plan. So, I was sitting at the end of the aisle and of course jet lagged and thinking, and tired from working, but thinking my biggest fear was that I wouldn't be able to get up and walk, that I'd freeze if they read our names out, Paul Patterson and Peter Frampton and myself, that I'd be just freeze to the spot. And I had a friend of mine that I'd known that actually lived across the road from me in London, but had subsequently emigrated to the US as my +1. So Marina was sitting by me and they read the names out. And I was like, I can only describe it as being a greyhound out the trap after the rabbit. I went like a heat-seeking missile to the foot of those stairs so fast that I turned around thinking, where's the boys? And they're still sitting there, doing the kind of, oh, I've won face, while the camera's on them. And I was already at the foot of the stairs. So I went back and collected them. And then we all
went back.
Oh, yes, I went back to collect them, which, I mean, it's very silly, actually, when I think about it. But you don't think. You're not thinking at that time because it's so nerve-wracking. And then standing on the stage, there were certain things, for example, in my stupidity, I thought it would be rather similar to standing on a stage in a theatre. So you can't see faces. Well, of course, it's lit for television, so you can see every face really clearly. And that's quite a daunting thing, particularly looking at the first 3 rows, which is basically where all the top turns sit. So,
Right.
That was nerve-wracking, but I did manage in those split seconds, because it feels like hours and it's only moments, to find Mel, who looked at me and actually looked very moved and had tears in his eyes. And that kind of unsettled me and settled me at the same time. I felt held, but I couldn't find John because he was too far over, too far back. Anyway, I was just grateful I didn't have to say anything. And then, of course, that you go off and you follow like a red line and you go through various press rooms. And of course, the thing, as it is with I think probably most people, was the minute I got off the stage, I said, I have to have a pee. Where's the bathroom? But of course, the thing is that at that point, the Academy Award, the statuette, doesn't obviously have your name on it. It's not engraved or anything. So that was a bit of a worry, and you're clutching it. So you go to the bathroom, and of course, the door tends to be slightly high, and the cistern sloped, and the loo roll holder was too narrow, and it weighs quite a lot. I mean, it weighs about 6 pounds, I would say. So I didn't know what to do with it. I thought, I can't put it on the floor. 1, that's disrespectful, but 2, someone could pinch it. So what am I going to do with it? So I'm trying to hold this in my dress, while in the top of my dress, while trying to get to the loo, which of course is just something that is so bizarre. But
The things we have to go through.
I know. I mean, it's really peculiar. But anyway, it was a wonderful evening. The best part of the evening, really, other than winning, which is sort of unbelievable, the best part of the evening was, I came back, sat in the seat, and then they had cinematography up, and of course John won, and I got so excited I shot in the air, and I had new shoes on, and they were satin shoes with new leathers, how slippy they are, and of course I hadn't worn them enough or scraped them on the pavement to actually get any purchase, so I shot in the air and then went straight under the seat in front and had to be pulled out. So yeah, not
Oh my
really
God, what a
planned thing to do,
memorable.
but yeah, no, it was funny. Anyway, so then that evening after the governor's ball, we went to a restaurant where a lot of the cast had flown over and they couldn't get tickets to come to the Academy Awards because they're very limited.
Right.
But they were there watching it live stream. And then it was just everyone who had worked on Braveheart. So it was like a company party. And we all just took our shoes off and were sitting on the set because we were used to being on location up to our ears in mud together. It was lovely, actually. It was a very special night, very special. And Mel won and the picture won. I mean, you never get better than that.
Yeah, and it was well deserved for all of those awards. Wonderful film. Very well. All these years you can watch it again, and it's still as fresh and new. Lois, I could keep talking to you for many more hours. Unfortunately, our time is up, but it's been such a pleasure having you on the show. So much more to talk about. We didn't even touch on so many things.
I know.
We'll
I
have to
know
have you.
that time when I blobbed on. I'm sorry about that, but
No, that's what it's for. No, I appreciate it. I'm so happy you were on the show, and I'll have you back, and we'll talk some more about.
lovely. Anytime. It would be my pleasure.
Great. Thank you, Lois. Have a
Thank you
great
so
day.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.